This will be a day long remembered. Now I am the master.
Welcome to another episode of Legends and Theories. And welcome to my ranking of the most impactful moments of each Star Wars movie. And with this, I'm looking at historically impactful moments. Well, technically, because, Star Wars isn't a true history, but we can take a look at these moments that go and have the smallest impact to the largest impact. And I'll be taking a look at not only why this is the most important scene of the movie in terms of how it affects the rest of the galaxy, but also why I'm ranking it there. So it's going to be just pretty interesting to look at. I have one scene from each of the 12 movies, and yes, I am doing the sequels. I don't love them, but I'll still at least talk about them just to, well, you'll see this pretty quickly, talk about how unimportant the events of that trilogy really are, at least in comparison to the grand scheme of Star Wars. So let's start off with number 12. And here we have the death of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. And based on the fact that I had to say the death of Luke Skywalker is the least important of these events, it's a really, really bad sign to just how badly The Last Jedi messed up. In fact, the only two important moments from this movie is Kylo becoming Supreme Leader, which is kind of neglected by the fact that Palpatine shows up in Episode 9, and he isn't really the main antagonist, and, well, Luke dying, and since honestly Luke's death is something a pretty major, although it was a completely stupid reason of him overexerting himself in the Force, it is not a good scene, and a little disclaimer to put it here, just because the scene makes it into this list does not mean it's the best scene of the movie. It just means it had the biggest impact on the entire galaxy. And I think I can very clearly be told here where this scene it was just so bad because Luke dies for just no reason besides the fact that Ryan Johnson wanted to kill him off, and it was really, really doesn't work. It feels pointless because as long as Luke was a little more cautious with that, maybe found a different way to go and distract his nephew, or didn't do whatever he did to make it lethal, he could have easily went and came out and wiped the floor with Kylo, since we could see that his X-Wing clearly still does work. And after that, he could have easily then went and defeated that resurrected Palpatine. So it is just a scene where it just shows just poor writing in this. There really is no change because Luke Skywalker just isn't there, and Rey's already been able to beat Kylo Ren. They literally had to bring in Palpatine because they were stuck at a point where there was no credible threat. So really, I mean, it's a moment that should have been one of the most emotional moments of the entire trilogy. It should have been one of the most impactful moments in all of Star Wars, but it just isn't. And that's the problem with it, and that is why it takes dead last in this ranking of all of these impactful moments. The next moment is the destruction of the New Republic in The Force Awakens, and that's because this conflict lasted less than a year. This government was just so poorly set up where everything important was in one spot. They literally didn't learn a lesson from Alderaan, and they put all their eggs in one basket, and that was destroyed, and the government fell. We really don't see any impact besides just vague allusions to it. to the fact that, the New Republic is gone and the First Order is taking over. We really don't get anything besides the people in the Resistance perspective on the First Order. And, well, you could sort of say that for the other two. You at least get to see alternate perspectives. You get to see, with the original trilogy, you get to see what it's like on Tatooine and that Empire isn't super popular there. You get to see in the Phantom Menace just the thoughts on the Republic and worlds like Tatooine. Well, Tatooine again, since Tatooine always appears in Star Wars, no matter what it's in. Like the most amount of movies compared to any other planet. So, just going back to it, as I said, it's honestly just it's so sad that the New Republic's fall is so insignificant because if I was putting in book moments, the fall of the New Republic and the EU would be pretty high on this list. But the fall here, it's just, well, I guess that happened. Let's move on with the movie. They never really take a look at what the fall of the New Republic is. They don't really take a look at anything that happens with the New Republic remnants. It's just fully the Resistance now, and I mean it's just stupid, which is why it's back here because the Impact really doesn't feel like it did anything because they never established anything about the New Republic in this era. So it's just nothing that's super impactful. And just looking at the other scenes in the movie that could have been here, I really think the only other one is maybe destroying Starkiller Base, but I feel like it's more of it's a victory that just stops a planet killer, but it really doesn't have any other greater impact than that. It is no major turning point in the war. It is just a battle they won, and it really doesn't change too much besides taking away the First Order's Death Star-like weapon and giving them a small little morale boost, which is taken out in The Last Jedi. So that's really the only thing I could say because yeah, there's some character deaths like Han Solo, but those aren't as impactful. And in terms of just greater universe, since this doesn't solidify Kylo to become a dark sider, he does get redeemed. So the New Republic destruction is really the only option that is left for this. Now we go to number 10, which is Rey kills Palpatine, and basically that's the reason it's important. It's another stupid scene where Palpatine easily should have won that confrontation, and we could see that he's very capable of stopping himself from doing Force Lightning, which is shown with him going against Mace Windu, but they didn't really care about that in this movie. They just wanted to kill Palpatine, and they had to find a way for Rey, someone who shouldn't have been able to beat Kylo Ren, to defeat the most powerful Sith Lord in the at least modern Star Wars era. You could definitely argue for other eras, but at a bare minimum, the modern era, and honestly, it's just so crazy that this is uh this is what happened in this movie. It's just dumb. I think that it could have just made so much better, and this fight could have been interesting. Maybe even have Anakin's Force Ghost come in, but no. This is just a scene where we have actually no idea what the impact from it is, which is another part of the reason that it's all the way back here because there's basically nothing said after the events of the Rise of Skywalker. Yes, there is the Starfighter movie that was announced, but that was literally announced like 2 weeks ago, so that doesn't really count. And looking at other scenes that could have been used, well, there's really nothing because this is another kind of joke movie story, so really nothing else that's really useful for the story to go and be moved along. Really, the only really important thing that happens is Palpatine returns and Rey kills Palpatine, so that causes the defeat of the Final Order, the First Order, and all that stuff. So I mean, I think that's what we guessed because technically they didn't say; they just showed a knockout version of the victory celebration from the special editions of Return of the Jedi. So really, you don't fully know, but again, that's just kind of shows just how weak the sequel trilogy was as a whole. And just taking a look at how I put these together, I think there is a good way to describe each section of these. The last section was, well, basically the sequels and why the sequels had such a little impact on the galaxy. The next part of this is basically going to be going and looking at the, honestly, moments that they go and set interesting things up, but the payoff isn't in these movies. These set up payoff to go off at a later date, and that's the reason they're here. They are still really important moments, but they are just to go and set up moments later on in the story, and that's just why they're in this part. So let's go take a look at those. And at number 9, we have from the Clone Wars movie, which, yes, it is a theatrically released movie. This was the first movie I've ever seen in theaters from Star Wars, so I definitely know that. Just in case you were wondering, and I wanted to look at all of them, and that is Anakin Skywalker going and accepting Ahsoka as his apprentice. And looking at the Clone Wars movie, it is, yeah, it's just a bunch of episodes that were put together, but it is our introduction to Ahsoka, and she's a pretty important character for not only Anakin's story, but for an impact in the greater galaxy. No matter which kind of you look at it, there is just her impact on Anakin specifically in the one before that. If you look at Lucas canon or her being in the EU, really only ends with her leaving the Jedi Order in those two, and that has a very major impact on Anakin. And then there's also the fact of everything she does in this post Empire era in the current Disney canon. But if it was something like her going and burying the clones or something, that would have been a lot higher. But this is just where the relationship begins. And because of the pretty major impact it has on Anakin, and this being one of the main reasons he has a big problem with the Jedi Council and the Jedi Order as a whole, and Palpatine's able to manipulate him accepting Ahsoka as his apprentice is that's a pretty major moment. It does have big impacts later on for what happens because of this decision, but the moment itself still isn't as significant. It's definitely more important than anything that happened in the sequel trilogy because it actually does have very visible consequences from it, and those really don't, which is why they were back there. But this one, it does have some major repercussions. It just sets those up, and taking a look at just why no other scenes really are as impactful from this movie. Really, the only other things you could say is them rescuing Jabba's son and making the deal with the Hutts, but we never really see the impact of them having access to those hyper lanes. And nothing really about Road to the Hut is super important since, well, you don't see anything from Road to the Hut until in any major way besides like a single cameo in like season 3 until you get to the Mandalorian Grogu next year where he's supposed to appear as like a gladiator. So really nothing super important happens in the movie besides this beating of master and apprentice and them going to have a pretty big impact on the galaxy. Now, to move on to the next one, we go to number 8, and that is Han Solo winning the Millennium Falcon. Let's be fully honest, Solo didn't have too many super impactful scenes. It was really only either him getting the Falcon or him making his friendship with Chewbacca. And while I love Han and Chewie, the impact the Millennium Falcon has on the Star Wars galaxy is it's far more important than the one Chewbacca has. And don't get me wrong, I love Chewbacca, but the Millennium Falcon is the reason that both Death Stars were destroyed. If it wasn't used to shoot down Vader's TIE Advance, the first one had never been destroyed. And if Lando didn't fly into Death Star 2, the Death Star 2 would have really never been destroyed. So, very impactful for that. Just going through, honestly, just really everything about the Falcon is super important and impactful to galactic history. It goes, and in U-books, a lot of people want to have it and or have it displayed, and Han is super protective over it. And as I said, the Falcon goes and just does all these important things. Not only the two Death Stars, but being able to take Luke to him being captured on the first Death Star, being able to rescue Leia, to everything that happens with them falling, with Han and Leia falling in love in the Falcon, and Empire Strikes Back, and I mean everything they use it for in the sequels, I guess. But I don't really want to look at those, so you can really see that. This is really the only scene I could choose from that movie because, as I said, it's really that or him meeting Chewie. And while him meeting Chewie would be great, I just think that it's just not as impactful as this other one. Now moving to number 7, we have our other Star Wars story, which is Jin transmitting the Death Star plans, and well, that's really is the most important moment of the movie because that's the reason the movie was made to show how Death Star plans were taken, and honestly, that's really it's a really simple one for this one. Really, no other scene in this is as important as it, and well, I'll be discussing the impact of the Death Star later, so I don't want to talk about it too much here. I was originally just convinced to have this one next to talking about the Death Star, which I'm just gonna be clear, that's gonna be something later. Luke destroying the Death Star. That's gonna be a point coming up later, and I wanted to have them together because of how connected they were. But then I just started thinking about it, and I was like, this moment is it's important, but it's not as important as the next two that are coming up, and that's just really it. It's just it's an important moment, but there's just the next two moments are more important. I had it over both of those, and I was like, yeah, I'm just not thinking right. I'm probably going a little too high off the Andor hype train with Rogue One, so I'm gonna have to calm down and rethink it. And I ultimately did move it back here, and it really does make sense. It's a really important moment. It leads to Luke eventually being able to destroy the Death Star, which again really important. But I'll be discussing that later on in the video, and this is an essential part of that. If this moment didn't happen, Luke wouldn't be able to go and destroy the Death Star. But taking a look at the next two moments, I think that those are just even more important than this one, and I was just not fully thinking when I did that first one. So when I originally wrote this out, so well, let's go and move on to the next one. And here at number 6, we have Vader's Revelation. And if you don't know what that is, please just go hang your head in shame because this is a Star Wars video, and this is the most iconic moment in all of Star Wars. And well, that's not the reason it's here because it's the most iconic moment in all of Star Wars. Because If there was something that had a bigger impact on the story in episode 5, I would have gave it, but there isn't because Vader revealing that he is Anakin Skywalker and is Luke Skywalker's father. It is, well, not only one of the greatest twists in all of film history, it is also just such an impactful moment for the galaxy. This goes and it sets up so many interesting things. It sets up Vader's redemption and, well, another spoiler alert, that's gonna be something I'm talking about later also. And honestly, it is just a really important thing for Luke to know that because if Luke doesn't know Vader is his father, and well, George Lucas still decided to have him be the father, and Luke just went to fight him, Vader would have been able to defeat him or turn him to the dark side, and ultimately it would have went way worse. But the only way for Luke to truly go and defeat the dark side, well, I'll talk about that later, is for the love of his father. And like I said, I'll go into that more in just a few minutes. But if he didn't have this moment where he learns that Darth Vader is his father, he never would be able to get to that moment where he goes and submits to the Emperor's pain and torture to be able to try and pull his father back. But again, I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. So these last two ones are just more of literally just setting up a very, very important moment later on, which is nearly what the next one was. But there was one scene that was more important, which is sort of a proof to my thing where I'm saying that there's these important iconic moments, but sometimes there's just one little scene that is just far more important. And the scene is, it's not exactly a scene, but it's sort of a moment that the Clone Wars have begun, and it is just really important because that is the true beginning of the Sith's master plan, and it is really just a very important moment. Again, there's really no uh, technical scene where it officially starts in terms of that's actually where the war begins. It all depends on your point of view of how it truly begins, if it is Obi-Wan being captured, or the Jedi rescue mission, or even the clones showing up, or literally when Yoda says begun the Clone Wars has, or when the conversation between Dooku and Sidious goes up about how the war has begun. But just the fact that the Clone Wars has begun in this movie is super, super important. And the only other thing that could have been close is Anakin and Padme's marriage. And with that one, that has some pretty major impacts, which, well, again, is going to be talked about later on. But just taking a look at the beginning of the Clone Wars, it is just super important for the galaxy. This is a war that goes and gives Palpatine emergency powers. It gives him more and more power until he eventually is able to declare himself Emperor. And that's all truly beginning as the Clone Wars begins, because before that there was just a small conflict on Naboo, and that managed to get him into power, but this is able to keep him in power because at this point already his term has expired and he's being um, asked to stay because of him being a stable leader and how much the people love him. And just through that and the fact that is that the Clone Wars beginning is so important for the Sith's master plan. Not only that, it's the beginning of the first major war in around 1,000 years in the Star Wars galaxy. I think that it just has to be put here, even though there's not really a full on single scene where it technically begins. If you want to take a look at, these all are very specific scenes for the other ones, but This is just, the fact that in this, the war has begun, and I think that's best described through the scene where Sidious and Dooku are talking about how the war's begun, and this is how it's going by this Sidious's plan. Which I think is very impactful. We have to take a specific moment, but more or less it's just the fact that the Clone Wars has begun, and it is a very, very important conflict. And just the beginning of it is super impactful to the galaxy since, as I said, this is the first war in 1,000 years. Now, going to number four, we have a moment where this is something that is really impactful in The Phantom Menace, but the impact of it is actually very hypothetical because, and on one hand, because of it being the death of Qui-Gon Jinn, and the reason the battle is called Duel of Fates is because the duel is for the fate of Anakin Skywalker. If Qui-Gon Jinn survives, then, well, Anakin is going to be trained by the correct mentor. If not, Anakin isn't going to be trained by the correct mentor, and that's why Qui-Gon's death is so impactful because if Qui-Gon did survive, he would go on to train Anakin, whether the Council allowed it or not, and he would have trained him to be a correct Jedi. He would not have fallen to the dark side. He would not have become Darth Vader, and he would have been able to defeat the Sith on his own. Well, I mean, technically, he still does, but he would have defeated them without having the entire Jedi Order and Republic destroyed. But due to the fact that Qui Gon does die, this really kicks everything else off and is the ultimate cause for it. There are still a lot of decisions along the way that go and still could have changed things, which is why it's not any higher because this is still a very major moment. It is something that changes everything, but due to the fact that it is a lot of hypothetical stuff, I can't put it any higher, but still, it is such an important moment that it is this high up at number four because, again, it does kick off everything for the rest of the saga. It does eventually lead to all these terrible moments, but as I said, there's certain decisions that go and are just have direct control over what happened in these moments. Different decisions could have been made, and that could have changed everything. But going to the top three, these are easily the three most important moments in Star Wars. And I feel like a lot of people are going to have a problem with number four. They could say that's number one. But as I said, it's a lot of hypothetical stuff, so I don't want to put it any higher, but still think it should be pretty high in this list. And at number three, we have the act of Luke destroying the first Death Star. And as I mentioned back in the Rogue One section, this is where I'm going to talk about the impact of it and the fact that Luke Skywalker was able to destroy the Death Star is extremely important because this is a true turning point in the Galactic Civil War. Many, many major things happen by Luke going and doing this. Not only does he destroy the Death Star, which is super beneficial since that was about to destroy the Rebel base on Yavin 4, it has so many other moments that you really don't think about, but unless you're a more deep Star Wars fan, but there is a lot in there. You see the rebels having their well, first giant victory while Battle of Scarif and Canon and the battle to take the Death Star plans, which is until the Battle of Scarif in the original EU, is considered the first major victory. This is the victory that really puts the rebels as a true and genuine threat. There, they only stole some architectural plans. Here, they went and destroyed a really powerful, really expensive battle station. Not only that, they went and they killed multiple major members of the military higher up, including Grand Moff Tarkin, Wolf Yularen, and a lot of the high-class Imperials. This went and also gave all these planets morale to go and support the rebellion and for people to join it because they wouldn't have done it under the control of the Death Star because their planet would be destroyed. But now that it was destroyed, they see that this rebellion has a chance and they can go and support it, and the Empire won't be able to severely retaliate against them as a collective people since they can't go and destroy their planet. And just looking like at all the other scenes, really nothing is as impactful as this. Yeah, there are some other great scenes. There's stuff like Obi-Wan's death and the battle before to attack the Death Star, and even the boarding of the Tantive, and so many other great scenes. But none of them are as impactful to the galaxy as the Death Star being destroyed, and that being the first extremely big thing that the rebels have done that most people are going to take notice of. The only moment that could even be considered close is the destruction of Alderaan, but just looking at it, that is just it's something that's really, really close. And I think I could have put it in here, but it's just to show the Empire committing an atrocity, and most people would have stayed just out of fear of the Death Star, and that's all changed by the rebels destroying it. So while destruction of Alderaan is close, I ultimately do have to give it to the destruction of the Death Star because it's such a more important and impactful moment. Now, taking a look at number two, I have to give this to Vader's redemption. And this is a moment that, once again, changes everything in the galaxy. Emperor Palpatine is, unless you're only going to by the Lucas-based films, temporarily killed, since he returns in both EU and Dark Empire and in The Rise of Skywalker, but this causes a very major blow against the Empire, something the rebels are able to take advantage of, and only thing that you could really compare and I would say could be it is the destruction of the second Death Star, but that wouldn't have mattered as much if Palpatine survived because the Empire would still have its leader. And if you take a look at the original EU and the Thrawn trilogy specifically, Thrawn points out that the major reason that the defeat on Endor was so bad was because of the fact that Palpatine was using battle meditation, and that ultimately caused a very disastrous defeat for the Imperials because they lost their coordination. And I'm just being fully honest, it is just so impactful because, again, the Dark Lord of the Sith has been killed, and the Rebel Alliance is able to legitimize itself into the New Republic and be able to go and strike back against the Empire even stronger. They're able to form a legitimate government, and they're able to start truly winning this war. In canon, this goes pretty quickly with them defeating the Empire in a year, which it was just honestly a really stupid decision, but this is not what I'm here to talk about. And in the original continuity, they went and spent another, I think, 15 to 19 years looking at the Galactic Civil War, having a bunch of different warlords, including the resurrected Palpatine himself coming back, and of course someone like people like Thrawn going and being a threat to the New Republic, and ultimately none of this would happen. The galaxy still would have been under control of Palpatine for honestly who knows how long. It could have been even forever if was truly immortal and being just to find a way to transfer between cloned bodies. And with that, it is super important that Vader went and, through the love of his son, he went to go and save him. And by saving his son, he revealed that Anakin Skywalker wasn't dead, that he still was a good person on the inside, and even though he's committed so many atrocities, just far too many to count. He still is redeemable, and he manages to go and, with his final act, he saves his son and kills just the most evil man in the galaxy. It is a genuinely great scene, and it is also something that changes this post Empire galaxy forever. And there's also an interesting fact this is the culmination of the prophecy of the Chosen One, although in every version of the story it sadly isn't the destruction of the Sith. If we take a look at the original EU, Palpatine returns, then there is Vergere and Lumaya, both who, well, Vergere is said to be a Sith, and Lumaya directly is a Sith, and she goes to train Jason to become Darth Kaitis. So Sith legacy continues there, plus there's the Lost Tribe of the Sith and the One Sith. And then with Disney, there's Palpatine's returning, and even with George Lucas's planned sequel trilogy, Darth Maul and Darth Talon would both have appeared in it. So yeah, honestly, it is. It's definitely something interesting to look at. So I'd say the fact that maybe if they were able to fully bring balance to the Force permanently and fully permanently destroy the Sith, then yeah, but it could be number one. But this just pushes it slightly under, and also there is a greater impact on everything that happens in galactic history with my number one choice. So let's go take a look at that. And that is Anakin Skywalker falls to the dark side, helping to kill Mace Windu and pledging himself to Palpatine's teachings. And I bet you're wondering why I say this scene specifically. Why is it not Palpatine declaring himself Emperor or other scenes like that? And that's because this is the moment where everything goes wrong. If it wasn't for this, Mace Windu would have went and killed Palpatine, and that would have been it. And if you're saying he threw the fight, in that moment he was fully relying on Anakin to go and save him. He had to make it look real, and it was so. If Palpatine had the absolute confidence that Anakin would go and save him, he he would have died in that scenario if Anakin shocked him and decided to remain loyal to the Jedi. And with that, it is honestly just so important because, as I said, this is where everything goes wrong. In this moment, Anakin can fulfill his destiny as the chosen one, even help Mace Windu go and kill Sidious and end this Sith threat once and for all. But no, Anakin goes and he decides to make the wrong decision, the selfish decision to go and save Padme, or at least try and save her. And yeah, you could also say Luke and Leia's birth is important, but I'd say the entire galaxy falling apart because of Anakin being selfish is the most important one because that causes Palpatine to go and execute Order 66. It causes him to declare himself Emperor. It causes every single disaster and tragedy that happens throughout the original trilogy and anything that's set after the Rise of the Empire. The galaxy could never go back at this point. Yeah, the galaxy has had wars before, and the Clone Wars is just that. It's another war. They could have won this war, and I mean, technically, winning it is really hard because cities control both sides. But with it, it is so impactful, as I said, because this is really the point of no return from the galaxy. Once the Empire is formed, there is a new form of government, and no matter which continuity you're in, there's people that are completely loyal to the Empire and its way of thinking, and people who want to keep that dream alive. It is something that just has such a big impact that the galaxy was eternally and forever changed. But yeah, honestly, this is a really fun video to make. Looking at it, did make a few small decisions to change things, but Ultimately, I had such a great time making this. It is really entertaining to do and look at these Star Wars movies. And I don't know, do you agree with how I rate these moments? Do you think I had a moment that was less important than a different one? Let me know what that moment should have been, and if you think I was right with all of these, and you think I ranked them wrong, let me know that also. But whatever it is, just let me know in the comments, and I'll see you on the next episode of Legends and Theories, and may the 4th be with you. Thank you for watching this episode of Legends and Theories. Please subscribe, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, check out the video on screen, and may the Force be with you.